We're grateful for who God is. That list of names given, holy and mighty and all of that, that's just the beginning of things. When Jesus was jousting with the Pharisees, Jesus made it clear to them that when you start talking about me, you're talking about something that surpasses Abraham. Because before Abraham was, he said, my name is I am. In other words, when you open up the book to look at all of the good things that a person can possibly be mighty and triumphant and awesome and holy, he says that that's just the beginning of it. He had to close the...
Who am I, America? Who I am, America? I'm a young man that grew up with a single mother and one brother. My story is a very interesting one. For some, it may not be as interesting as you would like, but there are a lot of things that I had to go through to get to where I am right now. I may not have lived the hardest life that some may have lived, but I still had to go through my struggles. There were a lot of things that I had to get through or go through to be able to get to where I am. Who am I, America? I'm a young man that was raised at a very young age, as I mentioned, with a single mother, but had a grandmother that poured a lot into me. As I was coming up through elementary school, I remember as my mother dropped me off, I would be with my grandmother and she would feed me each and every morning and made sure I made it to school each and every day. I was in elementary school and I remember those teachers. I remember that teacher. I remember that first grade teacher, Miss Wheeler. I remember the things that she shared with me, some of the things that she taught me. And one of the things I remember her saying is silence is golden. Not to keep you quiet, but to know when to speak and when not to. Knowing how to hold your peace and when not to. Those things at such a young age, I remember like they were yesterday. Most persons try to skip over those years, but I've used those years to get to where I'm at right now. So who am I? I'm that young man that allowed his grandmother to really pour into him. Why am I speaking a lot about my grandmother? Because this was a woman who was an entrepreneur. She never worked for anyone except herself. Actually, when she came to Baltimore from Virginia, she actually was the first African American to own a gas station in downtown Baltimore. And I would sit there as my grandmother watched. They would fill up cars, they would have a mechanic shop, and I would be just sitting there. She would pour in, she was pouring into me then because I saw a woman that always loved to work. She put her hand to the plow and never looked back. Who am I? I'm that young man that got poured into from his grandmother. Then, as I started to get older, and although my mother was a single parent household, that woman, my grandmother, still was showing me each and every weekend. I would make my way to her retail store, her bargain store. It's called P&R Bargain Shop. I'll never forget it because that was my first job. That was my first job, working for her. Each and every Saturday morning, getting up, catching a bus, hour down the road, making sure I got there on time, making sure I opened the store, set the merchandise out on the corner, swept the store, swept the front of the store, worked with the customers, learned how to handle money. Who am I? I'm a young man that got poured into by his grandmother at a very early age. And then as those years went from elementary school into middle school, which we called junior high, it was me, my mother, and my brother. We were living in Baltimore City for a while for my entire elementary school years, but my mother had an opportunity to move to what we call Baltimore County, which is Owings Mills, Maryland. Most people in that time, in the early 80s, had never heard of Owings Mills. But my mother took a leap of faith. Many persons wouldn't think that's a leap of faith, but it's a leap of faith when you go somewhere you've never been before. I remember because my mother and my brother and I, my little brother and I, was sitting on the curb at my aunt's house, waiting for my mother to come pick us up and take us to our new home. We waited, seemed like hours for her to come. And I remember she coming and we getting in the car and she driving up what we call Wrightstown Road, all the way up from Baltimore City, all the way through Baltimore County up to Owens Mills. And we finally arrived, but we had our own room. We weren't sleeping with my mother again. It was just me and my brother had our own room. And we were so excited. I believe that moment started to shift my life. My mother felt the need to get us out of the city early in our lives and made sure we had a place to stay and had a place to grow in a place we'd never been before. We had been surrounded mainly when we was in Baltimore City by African Americans. But then when we moved to Owens Mills, it was more Caucasians than African Americans. Who am I? I'm a young man that now lived in Owens Mills, didn't know anyone there, had no friends, had to grow up in a place I had never seen before. It was me, my brother, and my mother. It was just the three of us. And it was some struggles. It was some times where we had to struggle. It was some times that my mother actually shared with me on a number of occasions that we were about to be set out because we just didn't have the money to pay the rent. But somehow God always came through. And she shared that with us on a number of occasions, but we never knew it because I had a mother that worked really hard. She did it all by herself. She wasn't receiving any child support from anyone, from my dad. She was doing it alone. I never mentioned my father in the beginning of this because my father wasn't around at the time. Unfortunately, he decided that we were not part of his plan. So my mother was by herself. It was me, my brother, and my mother. Who am I, America? I'm a young man that was now being raised by a single parent in Owens Mills, Maryland, not knowing anyone there, but learning and growing at the same time. Entered into junior high school. I've always been a lover of school. I've loved academics. I love learning. I love reading. I love math. Math was my favorite subject. Always got great grades in math. But I was lazy. I was lazy in junior high and high school. Specifically junior high school. I was just lazy. I just did what I needed to do just to get by. I never really worked as hard as I know I could have. But I got through junior high and then went through high school. High school, something happened in high school. I was always going out for athletics, always trying to play football and basketball. Wasn't too bad, wasn't the best, but it wasn't too bad. But after the 9th grade year, after my freshman year, after my sophomore year, I decided that this was not what I wanted to do, and I knew I wouldn't be a professional football player or basketball player. So I decided to go into politics in high school. I decided to run for junior class president. I didn't want to run for treasurer. I didn't want to run for vice president. I didn't want to run for secretary. I wanted to go to the top. I ran for junior class president. That was a major change in my life because I made the decision that I believe sent my life on a trajectory to where I am right now. I actually won the election, became junior class president in a majority white school. The school was over 50-60% Jewish and about 70-80% Caucasian, and the rest of us were African American and or other nationalities. But I still became junior class president because that's the kind of reach God showed me, that's the kind of influence he was showing me at a very early age in 11th grade. Then in 11th grade, another thing changed my life. Who am I, America? I'm a young man raised by a single mother with a brother, but then found the woman that I would eventually marry. My wife and I met in 11th grade. 11th grade in high school. We dated for those 11th and 12th grade years. And even when we entered into the 12th grade, I ran for senior class president and won that. I was junior class president and senior class president. Those, I believe, are the years that set the foundation of my life. Because as I mentioned, the woman that I met, the woman that I was literally the person that I knew, we were meant for each other, would be the woman I would eventually marry. But before that, right after high school, right after graduating high school, I decided to go into the military. I decided to go into the Air Force directly out of high school. As soon as I graduated, went to Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio for basic training. From there, went to Biloxi, Mississippi for training school. And the moment I left Biloxi, Mississippi from training, I proposed to my wife. Came home. We literally got married in about 30 days after I came home. After that, 23 more days later, after that, we literally took a flight to Spain. My first duty station was Zaragoza, Spain. Let me share this with you. We didn't have a lot of money to get married. We didn't have a big wedding. In fact, I only think we spent $500 on our wedding. We didn't have a lot, but we did decide to spend the rest of our life together. That was the season that I know another layer, another major point, another major opportunity influence in my life. Significant milestone that happened. Married right out of high school, traveling to a foreign country, newly married, never traveled overseas before. We made it. We went there. We landed in Spain, Madrid, Spain, took a bus up to Zaragoza, Spain. Literally for the first time, we had been away from home together in a foreign country. Didn't really know the language. I knew a little bit, but didn't know a lot. But we still went. We took leaps of faith. It seemed like my life has been just leap after faith, after faith, after faith. That's all I've been doing, is taking those leaps. We took that leap to Spain. We spent 3 years in Spain. It shaped our marriage and put us on a course for where we are now. There was some bumps in the road there. 2 18-year-olds living in a foreign country, deciding to raise a family. Had our first child in Spain. Our daughter, Diera, was born in Spain. Who am I, America? I'm a young man at the time, newly married, with one daughter, living in a foreign country, raising a family, or at least trying to raise a family. Because I made a lot of mistakes. Because I really didn't have anyone to train me. I didn't know how to be a father, and I certainly didn't know how to be a husband. There's a lot of things that I did do that I shouldn't have done, because the training that I was supposed to have, I didn't have. But we hung in there. We made it through Spain. We made it through those 3 years. And after those 3 years, we came back from overseas. We actually came back into Maryland, was stationed in DC at Bolling Air Force Base. So we lived in Laurel, which gave us a great opportunity. Laurel, Maryland, which is right in between DC and Baltimore, where my family lived. So we had the best of both worlds. We were able to go in both directions, either directions in the same amount of time. But we made sure, that we were alone. We were able to grow. We were able to raise our family without a lot of family influence. I took charge. I took that opportunity to again raise my family. 2 more children were born. 2 boys were born, DUANTE and Devin. Here I am. I'm married with 3 children and in the military. But I really didn't believe the military was the best place for me to be. Everyone told me, don't get out. Don't retire. Do not get out. Stay in the military. You're going to get benefits. You're going to have retirement plan. You need to stay. But God told me to leave. And I literally decided not to re-enlist. I didn't re-enlist. So who am I now? I'm a father, a husband, and a person without a job because I decided not to re-enlist. It was hard that first year because I really felt like I made a mistake. I thought it'd be easy to find a job, but it wasn't as easy as I thought. I really thought about going back in. Well, something happened in our family. My wife lost her brother. And before that, we went to church. I went to a church I had never been to before, and I heard the word preached by a pastor. And that day, I truly believe that God was speaking through me to be a part of the kingdom expansion. That day, I truly believe I started to really say yes to God. That moment, I believe, shifted everything when I began to really become be a part of the mission of Jesus Christ. That means expanding the kingdom by executing ministry and excellence. That was the turning point in my life. I decided, in my own words, in my own vernacular, to go all in the church. I went to the church daily, volunteered the whole time, no pay, but just volunteering, hoping and praying and believing that God would come through. And the church decided to hire me. I was working for them for a few months, but then budget cuts forced them to lay me off. I was laid off from the place that I dreamed of being a part of. Who am I, America? Now I'm a young man that's unemployed, with a family, with no money coming in. And it was hard. It was really hard. I remember laying on the floor, literally with my son, DUANTE, crying, wondering if I was going to be able to get a job or when I was going to get a job, if I was ever going to get a job. And my mother called me and told me, I got a job for you. That mortgage business literally shifted my life. It gave me the resources that I needed. Then something else happened. I decided to go to another church. Went to this church called Morning Star Baptist Church. My wife and I decided to go there. That was actually her home church. There was a new pastor there, Bishop DUANTE. He preached a word. And he preached with so much passion I had never seen before. And when he preached, it literally, it's like God literally set me right there to hear that for that point in my life, just pouring into me. He was preaching to everybody else, but it felt like he was talking directly to me. In that moment, that's where I felt like I found that father that I had been missing my entire life. I told you it was just me, a mother, and my brother, but I never had that father figure. And he became that to me. I don't know about anybody else, but that's what he came to me. He was pouring and pouring into me, and so much so I became his armor bearer. I was literally helping him to do everything that he needed to do to prepare for services, to prepare for work. Prepare for Sunday morning services, prepare throughout the whole week. I learned the passion of reading the word. I gained the passion of reading the word. And then, let me tell you, I read this book, listen to me, called The Cost of Discipleship from Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Let me tell you, that book changed my entire life. The moment I read that book, that was my calling. I was called to preach the word of God. I was called to minister the word. My initial sermon, December 1999, is when I preached my initial sermon. That month of that year. I preached it, and then the crazy thing was my wife preached hers the year after, December 2000. So we were on the same course, preaching. And then I found my gift. My gift was teaching. So I began to teach Sunday school. I taught all these different classes Christian education classes. And then God gave me the opportunity to start a ministry called the mentoring ministry that we had at the church. It was an incredible ministry called Rites of Passage, ROP. We started that ministry from scratch. It started and it caught fire. We had over 100 kids at one time in that ministry. Over 100 young men at one time in that ministry, and they all were being fed. The ministry was gaining national attention. In fact, the late the great Elijah Cummings actually ministered for our culmination 2 years in a row, and he was sharing this ministry with everyone he knew. It was so powerful, had so much influence. We were training other churches on how to do a mentoring ministry. That ministry showed me that I knew how to lead, because I had to lead these men that were much older than me. I had to lead them on how to grow a ministry, but not only grow it, sustain it. It's one thing to grow something, as I've learned. It's one thing to grow something, but it's another thing to sustain it. And I learned how to sustain the ministry. And from there, I was put in charge of the stewardship ministry, and then the Christian education ministry for a brief year. For a brief year, I was put in charge of the Christian education ministry. And that was the point in my life that I knew I was called to pastor, because I had to lead so many persons that were under me, so many classes, so many individuals that were part of the classes, part of our discipleship ministry. I had to lead all of these individuals. So who am I now? I'm an associate minister, the armor bearer to the pastor, a husband, a father, and a full-time student at Howard University. Full-time student to get my master's degree. Doing all of those things in a full-time student. Eventually graduated. My wife and I graduated at the same time from Howard University. Got our master's degree, same time from Howard University. And then we decided to go to a school called Ashland University in Ashland, Ohio, to do our doctorate. Did it together, finished it, graduated at the same time with our D-men. And we knew at that point, it was time for us to launch our own ministry. I had an opportunity to pastor a ministry that was already in existence. But God said, it's time for you to launch your own. I want you to start a church. That was one of the biggest undertakings that you could ever have. Starting a church. That's where we are now. So who am I, America? You are talking to a pastor, a person with a doctorate degree, a master's, bachelor's, and an associate's degree. 4 degrees, pastoring a church, trying to grow a ministry along with my wife, We're both pastoring this great ministry called New Kingdom Faith in Glen Burnie, Maryland. Ministries extended to all parts of the community throughout Glen Burnie, Severn, and Hanover, Maryland, touching many lives. Young man that grew up in the elementary school years in Baltimore with a single mother, literally moving out to Owens Mills in Baltimore County, and that mother growing, teaching, and pouring into us, and allowed me to become the man that I am right now. There's a part of the story that I left out, but I want to make sure I mention it because it has me doing the ministry work that I'm doing right now. And that is, when I was overseas with my wife, my father passed away. My daughter was about to be born, but I didn't come home because my father and I didn't have that relationship. One day when I came home, I was in Laurel, and I actually looked and found my father's death certificate. And my father's death certificate read off the things that he had in his body. And it showed that he was HIV positive and he had heroin in his body. My father was an addict, and I didn't know it. It crushed me. It crushed me because I didn't know he was dealing with that disease. Addiction is a disease. And I prayed and begged for his forgiveness, and I asked for him to forgive me, and I told him that I was sorry. I told him I was sorry for thinking of him that way and not knowing that he had to battle a disease that most people lose a fight to. That has made me who I am. That has made me who I am. One of the major pillars of my life. I have a compassion for the recovering addict. I have a compassion for the addict that most people don't have. Maybe not meant to have, but that's what he told me to do. To love on them as much as I possibly could. To love on them as hard as I could. So who am I, America? I'm a pastor, wife, a husband, I'm a wife of 34 years, father of 3, grandfather of 4, 2 companies, one business, another nonprofit, a number of things that God has called me to do. Who am I, America? I'm that father. I'm that man that God has called me to be. And I'm so grateful for who I am. God bless you.